Shalom, Dr. Mishka Ben David. Thank you for joining us on Info Live TV today.
Shalom, Margot. My pleasure.
Mishka, I can call you Mishka. You're not only a well-known author of a number of best-selling novels that we'll touch on later in the interview, but you're also a former senior member of the Mosad, and you've agreed to talk with us about the assassination of Hizbollah commander Mahmud al Mabhuh in Damascus Tuesday night.
Yes, definitely, under the restrictions of what I'm allowed to say.
It's fully understandable.
Yeah.
Firstly, who was the man, Mahmud al Mabhuh? Could we refer to him as a ticking bomb?
Yeah, definitely so. Mahmud al Mabhuh was one of the founders of the Hizbollah. Before that, he was the bodyguard of Yasser Arafat, but after the first Lebanon war in '82, when the Fatah movement left Lebanon, he stayed there and with the other people actually formed the Hizbollah. He always undertook military positions and activities of terror. He firstly was known as the head of the overseas operations of the Hizbollah, and became worldly known by a number of operations, of terror operations, which he executed against the American Marine soldiers, where they had about 200 casualties and about 100 French soldiers that were killed, the kidnapping of TWA plane, and then a series of terror acts against Israelis. After Israel had killed the former chief of Hizbollah, Abbas Musawi, he was, Mahmud al Mabhuh was the one that carried out the two attacks in '92 and in '94 on the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires and on the Jewish community center there, with about 84 killed people, and then a series of other attacks in South Lebanon on Israeli soldiers and etc. And it definitely was a ticking bomb, because as he moved up the ranks, he became the number 2 after Nasrallah, in charge of all the military activities of Hizbollah, which included the firing rockets on the north of Israel and the kidnapping of the soldiers. And the guy never sat still, had a very creative mind, and was on the run of executing new terror attacks all the time.
Mm-hmm. What kind of life would a person like that have led? I mean, he was on Israel and the US's top wanted list for over a decade, and he changed identities. There are reports that he underwent plastic surgery. What sort of life would a person like him have led?
He definitely had to be undercover all the time. Probably did not use telephones and cellular phones, did not let anybody know where he is, had different locations, different apartments. I don't know for sure of all that, but I do assume that this was the kind of life that he carried on. We know that in addition to living in Beirut, he had an apartment in Damascus, probably more than one, which is where finally the hand that got it, whether it was the Mosad or not the Mosad, found him. Probably switched cars, lived an underground life for sure.
Now, although Israel has strongly denied any involvement in his assassination, the method used to kill him, I mean, what does this tell us about the capabilities of the organization that carried it out?
It tells us that whoever carried this out had tremendous intelligence capabilities and tremendous capabilities of executing an action, a military action. Because to reach a person like Mahmud al Mabhuh and to be able to carry out such an operation on him, one needed to know at a certain day, at a certain time, where the guy will be, in which car, in what apartment, etc. Now, to be able to have such an intelligence, it means to deeply penetrate the Hizbollah, either by a guy that was recruited and became an agent, and reported on Imad Muania, and because of the style of life that Imad Muania carried out, it had to be someone from the very, very close circle of him, or by other means, for example, very sophisticated listening devices and means that could locate him, probably surveillance from the air. And I would also assume that once some information was gathered and people knew where to start looking for him, then there were what we call combatants, which whether if it was the Mosad, then Israeli guys, if it was the CIA, then American guys, that would go undercover to the areas where he lived, go around, learn the area, see the car, plan how to plant a bomb in the car, and then do it. It takes a lot of sophistication and a lot of courage too.
Mm-hmm. Now the Mossad obviously had the capabilities to carry out such an operation, but how long would such an operation take to plan?
It really depends when does the information come in. Once the information is complete, I think that the operation itself could take a matter of days, weeks the most. But to gather the information may take much, much longer, especially in a case of a person like Muania that is on the run and hiding all the time. I think that in his case, it was the accumulation of a very, very long intelligence effort that lasted probably months, if not years. Just the recruitment of a person from his inner circle, if that was one of the leads, could take a few years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, obviously, among the thousands or at least hundreds of operations carried out either by the Mossad or other intelligence networks from abroad, operations can go wrong. And I remember an attempt by the Mossad to target Khaled Mashal in Jordan, and if I'm not wrong, you were a member or involved in that specific operation. What happened, or if you can use it as an example of something that went wrong?
I will use it as example both of something that went right and something that went wrong.
Okay.
Israel and the Mossad was not allowed to operate in Jordan and not even to collect information about Jordan from the time of the peace treaty that was signed by Prime Minister Rabin and by King Hussein. So actually we knew nothing about the Hamas whereabouts in Jordan. After the two assassination bombs in Jerusalem, that took place about 2 months apart from each other in Ben Yehuda and in the market, and took a toll of dozens of dead lives. We were ordered to find the heads of the Hamas in Jordan. And so firstly it was starting from the scratch, from zero, and within a couple of weeks of hard work, we knew everything. We knew where Mashal and where the other top members of the Hamas live, what cars do they have, where do they work, their routine, etc. We were ready for an operation. Now, the operation could be easy and successful. Was the Prime Minister then, Benjamin Netanyahu, willing to take the risk of endangering the relations with Jordan and either put a bomb in his car or shoot him? Mm-hmm. And then this is a kind of operation the Mossad knows how to carry out, and we also said that this is what we can do. Netanyahu's will, and I think that it's a very legitimate one by a prime minister, was that Mashal will be dead without anyone knowing that he was killed altogether. This involved actually touching him. Mm-hmm. And it meant that the combatants around him were unarmed. This was not the kind of operation that the Mossad carried out before. The combatants didn't know how to do it, And the result was a big mess that ended up very wrong. Everything that Netanyahu didn't want to happen did happen, including severing the ties with Jordan, etc. But this is a risk that the Prime Minister can and should take, and this is a misfortune that can happen in an operation. It does show, however, again, of the capabilities of the Mossad. I remember author Meir Shalev writing in the paper after the committee of inquiry that said that we did not think enough, we were not creative enough. He said, if going to an Arab capital, finding an arch-terrorist, and putting something in his ear is not creative enough, I don't know what creativity is. Anyway, yeah, this went wrong, and many other operations went well, including operations that Israel never took responsibility on, and that were not less complicated. We remember another operation that, whether the Mossad did it or not, is another issue, but of eliminating the head of the Islamic Jihad, Fathi Shkaki, in Malta, when he was with a wig and with glasses and under another name, and on his way from Syria to Libya and back. And still, in that very short time that it was on the route, whoever did it managed to catch up with him and to eliminate him. So the capabilities are there, and the risks, the huge risks, are there too.
Tell me, how do you think the assassination, Tuesday's assassination, will affect the Hizbollah? The fact that whoever was responsible succeeded in reaching the top ranks of Hizbollah, in other words, the one under Nasrallah. Do you think that will have any effect on the movement?
I think it should and must and will have an effect, but it will have two reverse effects. The first one will be, as far as Israel is concerned, the first one will probably be that they will want to take a revenge. Monia had a deputy, Talal Khamia, for many years. Probably he or somebody else was already nominated to the job and will want to prove that he can also carry out operations like Monia. Also, the Hizbollah is a movement. Once they named Israel responsible, and it doesn't matter if Israel is responsible or not to that effect, because they have named Israel as the one responsible for it. They will want to take a revenge. It may take a couple of months, like it took in '92 before blowing up the Israeli embassy. They have the entire world that they can operate. We are on the defensive now. We cannot make sure that they cannot carry out an operation like this again.
In many countries.
They have networks in many countries. There are fundamental Muslim communities in many, many countries that they can operate from. This is in the short term. In the long term, I think that Nasrallah knows very well now that whoever got to Moania can get to him. They know that they are penetratable. I don't know if that's a word in English.
But you can, well, they know they've been infiltrated, let's say.
And it must have an effect on them. We saw in different cases in the past when we eliminated the top members of the Hamás, that it had an effect. And it will have an effect on Hizbollah. Hizbollah is a very bitter enemy and a very cruel enemy, but Hizbollah is not irrational. They are not crazy. They have a goal and they have certain means, but they take into consideration what the other side is doing. And they know now for sure that we can penetrate them, we or the CIA or whoever did that, and it will have to moderate them.
How about Syria and Iran? I mean, they condemned, obviously, the assassination, and we know that Iran is funding Hizbollah with arms as well as funds, the same with Syria. How do you think that will affect?
Syria will definitely be affected because the operation or the results of the operation took place in Damascus. It doesn't mean that the bomb was planted in Damascus, because Mouania was going back and forth from Beirut to Damascus. But it's not the first operation in Damascus in the last year that we don't know who was responsible for it, and not the first operation in Beirut that we don't know who was responsible for. And they know that if whoever reached Mouania in Damascus could reach Khaled Mashal in Damascus and everybody else. So they must take it into consideration. Iran is a completely different story. I don't know how the Iranians would react. The Iranians are much harder to predict, because they, not as a country, but as a country that operates terror organizations, can do many things that so-called normal countries would not allow themselves to do.
Mishka, I'd like to turn now to the other side, your novels, and obviously 6 years ago you wrote Duet in Beirut, which has so far only been published in Hebrew, and actually it talks about a very similar operation in Beirut vis-à-vis Damascus.
Yes.
Perhaps you could...
Yes, in this book, in Duet in Beirut, I describe, it's a novel, a suspense novel. I describe a situation that the Mosad is going to Beirut to assassinate the head of the operations, of the overseas operations of the Hizbollah, namely Imad Mouania. I did not name him Imad Mouania, I just took a fictionary name, but the title is his title. And I describe how the Mossad gets there, how they find him, how they try to kill him. The plot of the book is that in the first attempt they fail. The guy that was supposed to shoot him doesn't shoot because there is a little girl there. And they come back, the team comes back, and that guy is being expelled from the Mossad. And then after additional terrorist activities of that same guy, the Hezbollah guy, then the Israeli combatant goes by himself to Beirut to complete the mission by putting a bomb under his car. And I describe in details how he finds the guy, how he finds the car, how he assembles the bomb, gets under the car, puts it there. And by a turn of history, 6 years later, it happened. I believe that it happened quite similarly to the way that I described in the book. Yeah. Yeah.
When do you think our viewers will be able to read the English version, or when will it be translated into English?
The book was translated into English. Right now, I have a person in New York that conducts negotiations with some literary agents and some publishers. Also, there was a producer in Hollywood that a film producer, an ex-Israeli that lives in Hollywood, that happened to buy the book at the airport, read it on his way to New York, and contacted me and bought an option to produce the book. The option
to produce a film.
The option that the producer bought, the term finished. He did not produce the movie, so my person in New York is trying also to sell the rights. I do hope that it will happen.
And there's another novel on the way, isn't there?
Yes, I have another couple of novels that I'm trying to translate, which are also suspense novels about the Mossad, and another one that I wrote now that this one happens in St. Petersburg in Russia. It's a love story between a Mossad agent and a Russian woman that turns out to be a spy catcher of the KGB or the FSB, which is the name now of the new KGB, which I hope will be translated, will come out shortly in Hebrew. The one before that I'm also working on is named Encounters in Berlin. It talks about The Mosad, the official representative in Berlin, who is a second generation of Holocaust survivors, and he gets a message that he has to convey to the Germans about a group of Israelis that is there to execute a terror attack against neo-Nazis, and he is unable to hand over Israelis to the Germans, and from that point on, the plot
thickens and develops.
Yes. Yes.
Definitely fascinating reading, and hopefully it won't be long before the books will be in English on the bookshelves, and who knows, maybe a movie. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Ben David.
Thank you too, Margot. He definitely had to be undercover all the time. Probably did not use telephones and cellular phones, did not let anybody know where he is, had different locations, different apartments. I don't know for sure of all that, but I do assume that this was the kind of life that he carried on. We know that in addition to living in Beirut, he had an apartment in Damascus, probably more than one, which is where finally the hand that got it, whether it was the Mossad or not the Mossad, found him, probably switched cars, lived an underground life for him, because as he moved up the ranks, he became the number 2 after Nasrallah, in charge of all the military activities of Hizbollah, which included the firing rockets on the north of Israel and the kidnapping of the soldiers. And the guy never sat still, had a very creative mind, and was on the run of executing new terror attacks all the time.
Mm-hmm. What kind of life would a person like that have led? I mean, he was on Israel and the US's top wanted list for over a decade, and he changed identities. There are reports that he underwent plastic surgery. What sort of life would a person like him have led? Shalom, Dr. Mishka Ben David. Thank you for joining us on Info Live TV today.
Shalom, Margot. My pleasure.
Mishka, I can call you Mishka. You're not only a well-known author of a number of best-selling novels that we'll touch on later in the interview, but you're also a former senior member of the Mosad, and you've agreed to talk with us about the assassination of Hizbollah commander Mahmud in Damascus Tuesday night.
Yes, definitely, under the restrictions of what I'm allowed to say.
It's fully understandable.
Yeah.
Firstly, who was the man, Imad Munir? Could we refer to him as a ticking bomb?
Yeah, definitely so. Imad Munir was one of the founders of the kidnapping of TWA plane, and then a series of terror acts against Israelis. After Israel had killed the former chief of Hizbollah, Abbas Musawi, he was, Imad Munir was the one that carried out the 2 attacks in 92 and in 94 on the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires and on the Jewish community center there, with about 84 killed people, and then a series of other attacks in South Lebanon on Israeli soldiers and etc. And it definitely was a ticking bomb. Before that, he was the bodyguard of Yasser Arafat, but after the first Lebanon war in '82, when the Fatah movement left Lebanon, he stayed there, and with the other people actually formed the Hizbollah. He always undertook military positions and activities of terror. He firstly was known as the head of the overseas operations of the Hizbollah, and became worldly known by a number of operations, of terror operations, which he executed against the American Marine soldiers, where they had about 200 casualties and about 100 French soldiers that were killed.